Under the imposing arches of Jefferson County Courthouse, a stately monument of justice built in eras long past, a palpable tension mingled with the hushed murmur of early morning proceedings. Sunlight slanted through stained glass and high-arched windows, casting intricate patterns on polished marble floors and worn leather benches. Today, the historic halls were set to bear witness to an incident that would soon etch itself into the annals of local history. A reckoning that transcended legal procedure and cut straight to the heart of accountability. At the center of this unfolding drama sat Judge Clarissa Monroe, a woman renowned for her uncompromising adherence to the law and her unyielding presence on the bench. Clad in a deep navy robe embroidered with gold trim and an air of self-assured authority, she had long been a fixture of the courthouse. Yet beneath that steely exterior lurked whispers of a prejudiced legacy, a tendency to dismiss and demean those who did not fit her narrow view of decorum and propriety. Today, that undercurrent of bias would burst forth in a way that no one in the courtroom could have anticipated. Opposite her, in the defendant's box, sat Marcus Johnson, a man whose very presence seemed to challenge the assumptions that had long been taken for granted in these corridors of power. Marcus, a dignified and soft-spoken African-American in his late 40s, carried with him the quiet strength of a life tempered by hardship and injustice. His deep-set eyes, the color of polished mahogany, reflected both the scars of past encounters with an indifferent system and a steady resolve to reclaim his dignity. Dressed in a crisp charcoal suit that contrasted with the ceremonial garb of the courtroom, he exuded an aura of calm determination, a man who had silently borne witness to injustice for too long. The session opened with the routine formalities, a parade of legal arguments, testimonies, and references to statute. Yet as the case progressed, the rhythm of the proceedings began to warp under the weight of something far more insidious. When it was finally Marcus's turn to speak about a matter of contractual dispute compounded by allegations of systemic mistreatment, Judge Monroe's countenance darkened. Leaning forward, her gaze, once cool and measured, narrowed into a glare of disdain. With deliberate, biting articulation, she addressed him in a tone that was as dismissive as it was demeaning. "Mr. Johnson," she declared with icy finality, "your account is nothing more than a tapestry of exaggerations and self-serving grievances. Perhaps you mistake your struggles for merit, but here in this court, such fabrications hold no weight. It appears the system is ill-equipped to deal with those who believe they are owed special consideration." Her words, laced with a venomous insinuation, hung in the air like a dark cloud. A ripple of stunned silence swept through the courtroom. Attorneys exchanged incredulous glances, and even the seasoned bailiffs stiffened in their posts. For a heartbeat, time itself seemed to pause as Marcus absorbed the verbal assault. Every word felt like a deliberate strike against not just his character, but against every individual who had ever been marginalized or dismissed by the system. His lips pressed into a thin line. His eyes, though burning with a quiet fury, maintained a measured composure. In that charged moment, the courtroom transformed from a sterile arena of legalities into a crucible where centuries of injustice were laid bare. "Your Honor," Marcus began, his voice steady and resonant, "this courtroom is meant to serve as the sanctuary of justice, a place where every citizen, regardless of their background, is afforded the respect and fairness enshrined in our laws. I do not come here demanding special treatment. I come here demanding that my voice, and the voices of countless others like me, be heard without prejudice." His measured tones rippled through the silence, each word a deliberate strike at the entrenched inequities that had long festered within these walls. For a long moment, Judge Monroe's eyes flickered with something akin to uncertainty, a crack in the mask of authority that she had so carefully constructed over the years. But rather than yield, she retorted with a sneer that cut deeper. "Mr. Johnson, with all due respect," she said, her voice laced with condescension, "the court is not a forum for personal grievances or poetic justice. Your claims, however impassioned, remain nothing more than the dramatics of a man who has forgotten his place." The dismissal was sharp and the tone unmistakably racial, an echo of biases that many had long suspected but rarely witnessed so brazenly in a formal setting. A murmur of discontent rose among the assembled lawyers and observers. In the gallery, a mixture of disbelief and anger was palpable. Among the onlookers, a few exchanged furtive glances, recognizing that the veneer of impartial justice was being stained by the very prejudice that the courthouse was meant to purge. It was in that charged moment that Marcus, already steeped in a lifetime of quiet endurance, did something unexpected. Slowly rising from his seat, Marcus's posture was one of calm determination, his movements deliberate and measured. Reaching inside his briefcase, a worn leather case that had accompanied him through many battles, he withdrew a meticulously organized dossier. The folder contained a collection of documents, transcripts, affidavits, internal memos, and recordings that detailed a pattern of misconduct, bias, and even corruption in Judge Monroe's long tenure. Each page was a testament to the countless complaints that had been swept under the rug and the silent suffering of those whose lives had been affected by her decisions. Clearing his throat, Marcus spoke once more, his voice now imbued with an unwavering clarity. "I am not here to entertain theatrics, Your Honor," he said, addressing the judge with respectful formality that belied the storm raging beneath his calm exterior. "I have in my possession evidence, a record of numerous instances where this court, under your leadership, has deviated from the principles of impartiality and respect. It is not just my voice that has been silenced by prejudice. It is the collective cry for fairness from every citizen who has ever stood in judgment's shadow." His words reverberated off the marble walls, punctuating the courtroom with a resonance that was impossible to ignore. For a moment, silence reigned as eyes darted between Marcus and Judge Monroe. The judge's confident facade began to crumble as she fumbled for a retort. "These documents," she stuttered, "are you implying that I have been—" Her voice trailed off, the accusation hanging in the air like an accusation of treason. Before she could complete her thought, Marcus continued, his tone rising with righteous fervor. "They detail a disturbing pattern, a series of decisions and remarks that reveal a bias so deep it undermines the very foundation of this court. Your remarks today are not isolated incidents. They are part of a larger narrative of disdain and discrimination." His calm insistence had grown into an undeniable command for accountability. At that precise moment, the atmosphere in the courtroom shifted irrevocably. The murmurs grew louder, and a palpable tension rippled through the ranks of attorneys, clerks, and even the security personnel. The evidence Marcus laid bare was irrefutable, a dossier that chronicled years of systemic mistreatment. His words found immediate resonance among those who had long feared that the scales of justice were being manipulated by unchecked authority. In the midst of this escalating confrontation, Judge Monroe's composure finally shattered. Her eyes darted wildly as she attempted to regain control of the proceedings, her voice now trembling with a mix of indignation and dawning terror. "This is preposterous," she exclaimed, struggling to raise her hand in futile dismissal. "You have no right," she began, only to be cut off by a resounding declaration from Marcus. "I stand not only as a man wronged by injustice," Marcus declared, his voice echoing with the authority of someone who had weathered countless storms, "but as a representative of every person who has ever been belittled or dismissed by a system that pretends to serve them. Today I invoke not just my own rights, but the rights of the community. I will no longer allow personal prejudice to masquerade as legal authority." At that moment, the once staid courtroom erupted into a frenzy of shocked whispers and gasps. In the wings, uniformed officers, ever vigilant and trained to respond to disturbances in order, stepped forward. The head bailiff, his face stern and resolute, exchanged a meaningful glance with Marcus before advancing toward the bench. In a series of rapid, almost surreal movements, the officers closed in on Judge Monroe. "Your Honor, please step aside," the lead officer intoned firmly, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. The command was delivered with a precision that resonated through every corner of the room. With the courtroom now transformed into a theater of accountability, the officers moved in unison. Within minutes, a span that felt both instantaneous and painfully drawn out, Judge Clarissa Monroe found herself restrained by the very enforcers of the law she had so long commanded. Her eyes, once brimming with unassailable authority, now widened in disbelief as cold steel handcuffs replaced the privileges of her position. "You cannot do this," she shrieked, a desperate cry that mingled indignation with a dawning fear. But Marcus's gaze remained unyielding, his voice resolute and calm. "I am simply ensuring that justice, in all its impartiality, is upheld. Today, no one is above the law, not even you." The arrest sent shockwaves through the courtroom. Gasps of disbelief rippled from the gallery. Legal professionals, momentarily stunned, scrambled to gather their thoughts. Even the seasoned clerks and bailiffs, accustomed to the quiet order of the court, could not hide their astonishment. In that instant, an era of unchecked authority began to crumble before the very eyes of those gathered. Outside the courtroom, word of the extraordinary events spread like wildfire. Journalists, community leaders, and civil rights advocates converged upon the courthouse, their cameras and microphones capturing every detail of this historic reversal. The very foundations of the justice system were being questioned, and a public outcry for reform was already gathering momentum. Later that day, in a hastily convened press conference on the courthouse steps, Marcus Johnson addressed a sea of reporters, community activists, and onlookers. "I never imagined that standing up for my dignity would result in this," he said, his voice measured yet resonant with conviction. "But today we are reminded that justice is not a static ideal. It is a living, breathing promise that must be defended at every turn. No person, regardless of their position, is above accountability." His words, captured in real time by countless media outlets, began to reshape public discourse, fueling calls for a comprehensive internal review of the entire judicial system. As the hours turned into days, the repercussions of Judge Monroe's arrest rippled outward. Behind closed doors, an intensive internal investigation was launched. Testimonies from former litigants, court staff, and even fellow judges began to surface, each recounting a litany of grievances, subtle indignities, and overt acts of bias. The dossier Marcus had presented was only the tip of the iceberg, a catalyst that uncovered a systemic pattern of prejudice that had long been allowed to fester in the shadows of legal authority. In community centers, town hall meetings, and even university lecture halls, the narrative of that fateful day became a rallying cry for change. Public defenders, civil rights activists, and ordinary citizens recounted their own experiences of discrimination and bias, their voices uniting in a chorus that demanded reform. "For years," one longtime court clerk confessed in a tearful interview, "we witnessed the erosion of dignity, but we were too afraid to speak out." Today, Marcus Johnson reminded us that silence only serves to empower the oppressor. Amidst this tidal wave of accountability, Judge Monroe's colleagues within the judiciary expressed a mix of disbelief and resolve. In an emergency meeting of the county's Judicial Oversight Committee, senior members solemnly acknowledged that the standards they had once taken for granted were now under a critical lens. Proposals for mandatory cultural competency training, transparent review boards, and even structural reforms to the court's oversight mechanisms were drafted in rapid succession. The reverberations of one man's courageous stand had ignited a movement that reached far beyond the confines of the courthouse. Speaking of ideas for positive change, you should definitely listen to this one. Subscribe to our channel and like this video. It will positively improve our day and help spread the message of accountability and reform. We appreciate your support. Let's get back to the story. In the days following the arrest, Marcus Johnson became a reluctant spokesperson for a community demanding justice. In a series of interviews with local news channels, he detailed his personal journey, a path marked by struggle, resilience, and an unwavering belief in the power of accountability. "I have always believed that the law exists not to protect the privileged, but to serve every citizen," he stated calmly in one interview, his eyes reflecting both the pain of past injustices and the hope for a more equitable future. Today, we witnessed a moment when that principle was enforced. And while the cost was high, the message is clear. Prejudice has no place in our justice system. Legal experts, too, weighed in on the unprecedented turn of events. Professor Denise Harper, a renowned authority on judicial ethics at a prominent law school, remarked, "The arrest of a sitting judge in a matter of public record is both a shock and a significant milestone. It signals a seismic shift in our understanding of accountability within the legal system. No longer can we assume that authority, when corrupted by bias, will go unchecked." Her commentary resonated deeply with a generation that had long struggled for transparency and fairness in the corridors of power. As investigations continued and the internal audit of Judge Monroe's record unfolded, a detailed pattern of misconduct emerged. The documents revealed instances where her rulings had consistently favored a narrow demographic, and her offhand comments, dismissed in the past as mere lapses in decorum, now painted a broader picture of systemic racism. These findings, published in local newspapers and discussed fervently on community forums, galvanized activists to push for comprehensive reforms. Legislative proposals to establish an independent judicial review board were tabled, and public pressure mounted to ensure that no other courtroom would become a theater for such blatant displays of bias. In a series of follow-up sessions, community leaders organized roundtable discussions with former court employees, civil rights advocates, and even reform judges from neighboring counties. The conversations, marked by both sorrow and hope, sought to address the lingering wounds inflicted by years of discrimination. This incident, one elder advocate stated, is a painful reminder that even in institutions built on the promise of justice, there can lurk an undercurrent of prejudice. But it is also proof that when we demand accountability, change is not only possible, it is inevitable. Within the corridors of Jefferson County Courthouse, change was not merely a promise, but a palpable reality. Over the following weeks, new protocols were introduced to safeguard against the abuse of judicial power. Every courtroom was slated for periodic reviews, and a special committee was formed to ensure that judges adhered to strict ethical standards. Even the very architecture of justice, once thought to be impervious to the ravages of human bias, was now open to scrutiny and reform. On the first anniversary of that historic day, the courthouse hosted a commemorative event unlike any other. Marcus Johnson, now regarded as a champion of civil rights, was invited to speak. Today, Marcus declared, we stand as proof that when injustice is met with courage, even the most entrenched systems can be transformed. My journey has been one of quiet struggle, but together we have ignited a movement that challenges every institution to honor the dignity of every human being. His words, met with a chorus of applause and affirmations, resonated deeply with those who had long been silenced by fear and neglect. Judge Clarissa Monroe's fall from grace had become more than an isolated incident. It had become a symbol of the urgent need for reform. While her arrest marked the end of one chapter, it also ushered in a new era of vigilance, accountability, and transformation. The legacy of that day was a powerful reminder. True justice is not static or self-affirming. It must be continually nurtured, questioned, and renewed by those who believe in the inherent worth of every person. As the commemorative event drew to a close, the sense of renewal was tangible. Community members lingered, discussing plans for further reforms and ways to ensure that the lessons of the past were never forgotten. In quiet conversations, many admitted that while the road ahead would be long and fraught with challenges, the unity and determination displayed that day would light the way forward. The courthouse, once a silent bastion of tradition, had been transformed into a living symbol of hope, a place where even the deepest wounds could begin to heal under the steady hand of accountability. Have you ever witnessed a moment when the scales of justice shifted in the most unexpected way? Let us know in the comments below.